Welcome to In Our Town, Conversations with Springfieldians Making a Difference. I'm your host, Tom Carlson, publisher of the Springfield Daily Citizen. If you'd like to comment on this episode, our email is inourtown@sgfcitizen.org. We'd love to hear from you. On November 5, Springfield voters are going to be asked to vote on a 3/4 cent sales tax proposal. The proposal is divided into two parts. 1/4 cent will be dedicated to public safety. Items under that are police and firemen pay and other types of compensation, fringe benefits, and it can also be used for things like a new fire station. The other part of it is a 1/2 cent, and it's going to be used for what I'll call community betterment projects that are consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. With me today are two men well known in the community who are going to speak to it, and they're not on the same page on every part of this. First is Tom Prater. Dr. Prater has been involved in so many volunteer activities in our community. I couldn't list them if I wanted to. But lately, he and his wife, Kim, have chaired the fundraising drive for the Art Museum. And he and former Councilwoman Phyllis Ferguson chaired the Citizens Committee that recommended the proposal to the City Council. Andrew Baird is president of Conco Companies. He was a founder of the Moxie Theater here in Springfield, and he and his family have been involved in many community activities for the betterment of the city of Springfield. On the tax itself, the way we got here was that back in 2008, there was a dramatic drop in the stock market, and the police and fire pension fund was about maybe 50% unfunded. Since then, the voters had approved a 3/4 cent tax dedicated to making up that funding shortfall, and this tax now is going to expire in the next several months. According to information I received from the city's Public Information Office, the fund is now 94.8% funded, and it's about $38 million short. I estimate the size of the fund, if I'm doing my math right, at about $750 million. So with that background, gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to In Our Town.
Great. Thanks for having us, Tom.
Thank you. I would clarify that the actual founders of the Moxie Cinema probably wouldn't want me identified as one.
Oh, okay. No, you've done a lot of work for them.
Tom, let's start with you. What was your role in bringing this proposal forward?
Well, back in the spring, the mayor realized that he and the city council and the city staff were having trouble figuring out how to approach completed funding of the police and fire pension plan. And they also realized that if we renewed the current 3/4 cent tax, we could fund the plan and we might have other things left over that we could approach, but how to do it and what to do were the questions. So he asked former Councilwoman Phyllis Ferguson and I to put together a commission to look at this, and we got 30 people from really all different areas of the city, different walks of life, different professions, and put everybody in a room to try to come to a logical solution. Now, the problem is we couldn't start till April, and we had to have the ballot language ready by the 1st of August in order to have it on the November election. If we didn't get it on November, the current tax expires in March, and you have to start all over again. So we asked for input from city departments, we asked citizen input, and we came up with an imperfect, but probably the best plan we could organize. And we recommended back to City Council that 1/4 cent of this 3/4 cent tax would not sunset. It would finish funding the police and fire pension plan, and the remainder would be used for other public safety initiatives, be that raising police salaries to where they're competitive in the market, be that building another fire station, but totally oriented to public safety. And we recommended that 1/4 cent never sunset. So that goes on forever. And I think Springfield residents have been asking for that. When you talk to people and listen, public safety is top of mind. So we still have another 1/2 cent. Some of our aspirational cities, and you can look at Oklahoma City, you can look at Chattanooga, have taken the opportunity and looked at a list of projects that they think are going to transform the city. And it takes about a year or two to do that.
And you had like over 800 different projects.
Right. Yeah. A lot of
How
stuff.
do you winnow all that down?
Well, it was tough, and then it was a fluid landscape. While we were working on this, the federal grant came in for the greenways of $24 million. A state grant came in for the art museum of $10 million. So every time we thought we might have a target, it changed. So we decided to develop a plan that gave city council what I like to call guidelines and guardrails, meaning that what we wanted council to look for is projects that stimulated economic development, that generated tax revenue, that improved the quality of life in our city, that didn't incur any extra debt, and that we call it investing in the next generation. Let's make Springfield a better place, not just for my kids, but my grandkids and my great-grandkids. Let's take this opportunity to take some tax dollars that people are used to paying and make Springfield a better place.
Okay, if I may.
Yeah.
Andrew, I want to break this down into the public safety part and then to the capital improvement part. As to the capital improvement piece, what are your concerns?
Is the half cent? Yeah. Well, my concerns are that we shifted at some point from the renewal of the 3/4 cent tax to address the fire and police pension to this kind of hybrid proposal with insufficient discussion and sort of against everything that was promised through the passing of that tax in the first place, which was an emergency situation in 2009. Not to nitpick, but I think it was 33% funded. The pension was 33% funded at the time.
Okay.
And it was, yes, the stock market crash that sort of prompted the movement, but it was also the state's Pension Reform Act, in which they basically said that they wouldn't be the backstop, the bailout party, that the city of Springfield was going to have to take care of this problem. And it was a pretty serious problem. I mean, I was on the chamber board at the time. We were working through our own pension issues separately with a multi-employer pension plan. So I was familiar with the issues at the time. I followed along, as it's been renewed. And the messaging in the beginning and throughout has been consistent that tax, if the voters of Springfield would trust the city and approve this tax, which at the time it was a bad time to ask for a tax, but if the voters would rescue, in essence, the city, because it was the city being rescued, not the pension. And I think it's important to remember that. But in any event, the promise that was made and has been made is that it would be sunsetted at the conclusion. And you can look, when all this sort of hybrid notion emerged, the mayor at the time, Jim O'Neill, and Bob Stevens published the op-ed that said, hey, wait a minute, we said we were going to sunset the tax. What happened to sunsetting the tax? And so when you talk about ideas for investing in the future of Springfield, I'm personally sympathetic to that. I don't think anybody that knows me would think that I would be prima facie opposed to investing in the future of Springfield. But I think we need to remember where this tax came from and what we said about it in the first place.
Well, so if you'd been king, how would you have done it differently?
This proposal?
Yes.
Well, I guess the locution he used was we couldn't start to until April to figure out what to do about this. But it's a 5-year. The expiration of the tax was known and the need to renew it. So I guess I'm a little unclear why it is that the city was unable to come up with a more thorough plan about what it is that they want to do, especially insofar as they diverged from what.
Well, let me ask Tom, what about that? In 2019, when the voters approved this, we knew the tax would have to be renewed possibly 5 years later. So that date's always been fixed. Why did the city wait so long to come up with a new proposal?
Well, that's a very good question, and I was finishing my term on city council when this first came up, and I think it was under the radar screen. I think city management felt that we were on target, but would probably have to renew it. But I don't think it became an issue. We were dealing with some other things at the time, so yeah, the promise always was, let's sunset this when we finish funding the police and fire pension plan. But I think things have changed, and what's important is city management obviously is going to change, mayor's going to change, city council's going to change.
Well, and just on that point,
Yeah.
just today we learned that the city manager is going to resign first part of January.
Right. So the environment has shifted. And what I wouldn't want to do is penalize the citizens of Springfield because of past mistakes that council made or a city staff or a city manager made, because we have the opportunity, while still keeping our taxes, our sales tax, probably the lowest in this area, we have an opportunity to, number one, finish the funding of the pension plan, and number two, do some things that people said in the comprehensive plan we want to do. The Forward SGF Comprehensive Plan is supposed to cover us from now until 2040, and a lot of citizen input, and the citizen input was pretty strong on these are some things we think the city ought to do. So we felt this was an opportunity.
I think the methodology in the past was if we have a capital improvements proposal, we will outline what we hope to get done over the next 4 years and be specific about it so that people know what they're voting for. And in this proposal, the council is not following that pattern.
Correct.
So how do the voters know what's going to get done in the next few years?
If the council had followed that path in the past 3 or 4 years, we wouldn't be sitting here today, because the council would have come up with a specific list of plans and projects. I think there's been a lot of turnover on city council. I think some people are relatively new into the city governance system, and nobody was really able to distill this into specific ideas. And that's why the mayor asked Phyllis and I to try to step in and put a little heft into it.
But you still haven't identified.
We still have. Well, we have identified we have identified a lot of projects, not all of which could be completed by this plan, because we've got a list of projects in the Forward SGF Comprehensive Plan that fit perfectly in here. But to try in the 8 weeks that we had to pick out which ones were the best, we couldn't do that.
Andrew, what were you going to say in regard to that?
Well, that just doesn't seem to be particularly prudent. Hey, we don't have our act together, but give us $45 million. That doesn't seem like something that if I know anything about the voters in Springfield, that isn't, I mean, they don't have a default setting for, hey, let's tax ourselves, give a bunch of money to the city so that they can figure out what to do with it. That doesn't sound plausible to me.
And as I understand it, Tom, you're much more intimately involved in it than I am. But the next step, assuming that the voters do approve this, there will be another review, and then there will be a list of specific projects. Maybe you could expand on that.
That's what the commission requested. They requested that if this passes, and I'm going to say when it passes, that we have a much smaller group who can spend an adequate amount of time really honing in on these projects, knowing about other funding sources, knowing which ones have come to the top of the list on the Forward SGF plan, and then give council some advice, and not only give them advice, but give them some monitoring. Monitor, and let's make sure council is doing what they're supposed to do. And use that completed as progressed model, completed as promised, because with the 1/8 cents transportation, with the 1/4% capital improvements, they have come up with a list of things, and they've.
And then you also have the level property
tax, and completed as promised. So we're going to have to hold council and city staff to this, because Andrew's exactly right. The voters don't like to give people a blank check, and in our short time frame trying to put all this together, we didn't feel comfortable at all in giving a list of 10 different projects.
My son needs money, right? I've got a son. I don't think he'd mind my talking about him. And, he lives in Los Angeles, and he can't quite necessarily cover all the money that he needs to live on a day-to-day basis. He has things that he wants to do for the future, but he also has food, that he needs to eat and rent that he needs to pay. And he calls me from time to time needing, an injection of, I guess they're not tax dollars, but whatever they're parental revenue.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing that I try to do is try to put some structure around that makes some sense, and say, hey, well, if you've got some money coming in from a job, probably what you need to do is put that first towards the rent and the food, and then let's figure out what sort of aspirational investments for the future or whatever, or for your lifestyle or quality of life you'd like to make. And I think I'm not saying that I'm a great parent. So sometimes those conversations don't go like I'm saying they would go, but I think that most people would say that in the parental situation, you should ask him to figure out the plan rather than sending him the money first.
Well, what about?
And that's generally what I do, is I ask for a plan before I send the money. And I don't think that's what's happening here. They're asking us to send the money before they figured out the plan. So what I would prefer is that they pull this off. They can't pull it off, but if you say, why am I not in support of it? I think just like the first pension tax, they voted it down. Come back having done the appropriate work and propose something with the completed as promised model, get your priorities in order so that they can be specified, and then bring that to the voters.
Well, what about the argument that something like $10 million comes in from the state for the art museum, or $25 million for Ozark Greenways, and you never know, so you have to make some calls at the line. And you wouldn't want to. What do you do?
I think what I would say is, you say, well, if the environment shifts, the council shifts, the city manager shifts. You have these shifting things that go on, but I think what doesn't shift is the need for the city to have a certain baseline level of credibility, which I think can only be guaranteed by following processes that people recognize, regardless of who the manager is or who the council is. I think the completed as promised thing is an example of that. That template has worked, and I think if people reference it and follow it, it should continue to work. I think it's just a baseline is, what level of confidence do you have in the navigation of the shifting environments? I would advocate for following the correct procedure rather than giving people the money before they've done the work to put a good proposal in front of the public.
And that was the same angst that we went through on the commission, is ideally we would have had this list, and you can say who missed the boat in the past, but then when we looked forward at the cost of doing nothing, that struck us as imperative that we come up with some kind of plan now. Because if we do nothing and this tax expires, we're putting the city in an almost immediate, somewhere $4 to $5 million, $4 to $5.5 million budget hole, because the money has to go to the pension plan no matter what, whether this tax passes or not. So then city has to start saying, what are we going to cut that $5 million a year out of the budget? Are we going to cut police? Well, we know that's not popular. Are we going to cut public works and not get the roads repaired and the storm drainage put? So the cost of doing nothing, it's not just the sales tax, but it's also what's called the use tax that's tied to our sales tax that comes from all the stuff we buy on Amazon and online. So it would be a double whammy to set us back, I'm afraid, if we don't pass it now. And that was one of the motivators for us to go ahead with the plan.
Well, but when I'm talking to my son, there are usually bad consequences for what's going to happen if I don't send him the money, right? And I think the point remains that, somebody needs to look at these issues and get a proposal back to the but I they've known about the tax for 5 years. It's not good practice to do it.
And you say that but you got to remember that council changes. So they have known about it for more than 5 years, but we're going to have change in city manager, we're going to have change in mayor, we're going to have change in council. So you're right. At some point, the ball was dropped. What we're trying to do is play catch up and not let us get further behind. And your son doesn't have to hire policemen and firemen to protect himself. So he doesn't have some of those fixed costs that the city has that worried us about not funding.
Well, and there's a lot of, it seems to me, vagaries about what can happen in the future. If I'm right about thinking that the fund is in the $700 to $800 million range, if the market got 10% next year, it's more than fully funded.
Right.
And you don't have to come up with any money. Well, of course, if it goes the other way, like it did in 2008, I'm not sure what we do. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, I'm Ryan Collins. I'm the Business and Economic Development Reporter at the Springfield Daily Citizen. Pretty much born and raised in Springfield. I went to Glendale High School. I graduated from the University of Missouri with degrees in journalism and economics, hired directly by Bloomberg News right after college. It's been very refreshing to come back to Springfield, report on the city. I think one of the best aspects of my job is just being in the know. I'm constantly in touch with people all across different types of companies. And I think we have a lot of moving parts right now that are trying to work together, and I feel very lucky to try to cover that. After my week, I spend time with my dog. I definitely try to get out in nature. We go out to Busick or somewhere like that. Nash. He's named after my favorite economist, John Nash.
Tom, the chamber in the past has come out and actually sort of run campaigns on these kinds of things, but they're not doing it this time. Why is that?
Yeah, and I don't know. I know the chamber had a task force that met, and I wasn't a part of it, and that's a confidential task force, so I don't know quite what the discussion points were. I know the chamber board is going to look at it next week. The chamber has run campaigns in the past. Is the chamber still relevant in this type of situation or not? I think that's to be determined. And I've had discussions with Matt Moore, the chief executive at the chamber, and with Brian Hammonds, the chamber chairman, just to let him know where we at the commission, where we came from and what we're hoping for.
Well, my understanding, like you said, I think it's confidential, but the task force was not recommending it to the board. Did either of you guys?
I'm not on the chamber board, and I'm not on the task force. So somebody asked me to come, and because they knew I was in opposition to the tax, I don't know what the overlap between what I'm saying and what anybody in particular thinks about the thing. So
let's move on to the public safety portion. I'm going to read what it says on the ballot. Shall the city of Springfield, Missouri enact a city sales tax at the rate of 0.75%, 1/4 for the purpose of funding public safety initiatives, to include funding the remaining obligation of the Springfield police officers and firefighters' pension and increasing officer and firefighter pay. And that's not to sunset. So one of the questions I had is, right now, I think there's 50, 60 vacancies in the police force. And so part of the idea behind this is if we could increase pay, maybe we could fill those vacancies.
Well, we had a presentation this summer from both the police chief and the fire chief, and at that point, I think they were 52 vacancies short. The highway patrol had raised their base salary, and all of a sudden, police officers weren't applying or were fleeing to higher paid jobs. And so all of a sudden we're 50 people short. And I think that's an untenable situation to put our citizens in, is not having the police coverage that they want. On fire, the salaries are better from what I understand. We're still way behind in the capital improvements budget in terms of some extra fire stations. The chiefs talked about a combined police fire station in the northeast part of town. I think they're still understaffed in the west part of town. And fire stations come up on a cycle, but we haven't been able to keep up, apparently. So this would help fill that hole.
Well, what happens if we get to a situation where we have full employment with police and fire? Where does the money go at that point?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I'm assuming that the city council and the city manager would put it in the back for a rainy day when the next time the economy goes in the tank, or finish their life cycle replacement of equipment, things like that.
I guess the thing is it was a specific thing, the 3/4 cent sales tax, to do a specific thing, and it's become kind of an omnibus spending project here. I'm not opposed to paying the police more or any of the specific things really that are being. I mean, it's just a procedural question.
Well, what I was wondering, if anybody's worried about getting criticized the way the state government did when voters approved the lottery. And they said all that money is going to go to education, which it did. But then the amount of money going to education out of the general revenue was correspondingly decreased. So at the end of the day, you weren't any different. And what's to prevent that from happening here?
Yeah. That's a good question, and that's something that I think anybody running for mayor or city council ought to be asked.
That's pretty much the questions that I had, guys. What have I not asked you that you would like to tell our listeners?
Well, I think the city is at a critical junction of moving from good to great. And I really noticed this as I was very involved in the comprehensive plan. Good to great is intentional. You can't have a great city without being intentional. You can't just plod forward and let it happen. And sometimes that's easy to do, and sometimes there are leaders in this community who just want to plod forward and make everything happen. I think we have to be aggressive in recruiting residents, attracting residents, recruiting businesses, growing our tax base, and making Springfield a great place to live. We're losing college students who could be here. We're maybe not attracting the kind of businesses that would hire the people that we want to be here. So this is a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle. I would love to come to the voters with a 1 cent tax and say, let's finish the art museum. Let's totally develop a new area of Springfield. Let's take St. Louis Street and reimagine it. That's pretty aggressive and probably not going to fly right now. This money from this is $40 million a year, $35 million a year. We can do some of what we need to do, but I don't think we can do all of it.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you wanted to speak to, Andrew?
Well, I guess just listening to that, I mean, I would also love for Springfield to become a great city. I mean, I'm not sure that in some perspectives that's perspectival, right? In whose perspective is it going to be a great city or what it is? But I mean, investing in the future isn't a problem, but I think we've got unfinished business in the past. The future of Springfield would look a lot different today had the voters of Springfield not signed on to the proposal to bail out the city. I mean, we should remember that what was bailed out was not the pension. What was bailed out was the city, who had an obligation to fund the pension. And had the voters not signed on to that difficult proposal in 2009 and stuck with it, then we don't know, the future. We don't know the future. And we would like to work for it to be a better place, but there could be unforeseen events, things that people aren't thinking of now, where we're going to need to go to the voters again and say, hey, we need help to maintain the goodness of Springfield, not to achieve the greatness. And there needs to be a mechanism for that, and the city has to have credibility. This is a total departure from that, and I think what needs to happen here is that we need to maintain this mechanism whereby we can address an emergency to the city. That's important for the future too, and we're going to leave that behind going off on this other tangent.
Guys, I was going to ask you both for kind of a closing statement. If you want to do that, that's fine, but it sounds to me like you kind of already did it.
Well, I think Andrew and I agree on a whole lot of these things, and I think we're both, as are you and the Springfield Daily Citizen, we're both looking towards and looking out for the future of Springfield. What I would just say is vote yes on question 1 for no increase in taxes.
You get the final word.
I'm not going to vote for the tax, but hopefully something will be brought back to us that I would vote for.
Gentlemen, thank you for being my guest today on In Our Town.
Thank you.
That's it for this week, and many thanks for listening. If you'd like to listen to other episodes, you can visit the Springfield Daily Citizen website at sgfcitizen.org/In Our Town, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.